Welcome to Conversations. I'm Suresh Kochatar. It's a question that many people are asking from the last 4 days, or rather a week. Why has President Trump changed in his attitude towards India? An aggressive President Trump who threatened sanctions in India, now with 50% may even go up because we are buying oil from Russia, has suddenly said Modi is a great Prime Minister. And of course, he would love to talk to India. And he will be soon speaking to Prime Minister Modi and even signing up a deal with India. What changed? The main reason why political observers are saying is that it is China's embrace with Russia and India that has pushed US into a corner. If you ask me, that is a question. Has it really happened? It's a complex situation. And yes, there is strong evidence to suggest that the US tariff has pushed India to go towards China and Russia, look at new markets, and of course, make diplomatic moves like was done at the SCO summit. And the famous move, the famous photograph of President Putin, Xi Jinping, and Prime Minister Modi, all three in one frame, seems to have jolted President Trump. The SCO summit has actually made more moves than one. It has actually nudged India into an assertive posture, including some warming towards China and Russia, rather than a pallying up, as one can call it that for. It's not a straightforward alliance. India has a relationship with Russia that goes back to 60, 70 years. With China, we have our own problems, which I'll talk about it later. But let us look at what really happened and a breakdown of what the sources indicate, what India seems to be doing, and what this might mean in the long-term plan. Let's look at why this is happening, or rather, why it happened. We all know that the tariffs from the US on India was killing, still is, at 50%, which is 25 plus 25, which is because the basic tariff stayed at 25 and the oil part of it was 25, which all of you know. But this tariff was only on certain sectors. Pharmaceuticals was exempted, so was IT, and a few other small ones. But for us, the major ones like gems and jewelry, textiles, shrimps, all got impacted. They are still impacted. The US thought that India will buckle, that President Trump thought that Prime Minister Modi will come begging to him to ask for the tariffs to be taken down. But Prime Minister Modi didn't do anything. He played his cards very well. He didn't do anything that would show India as a weak nation. And he went ahead and did a couple of very smart things. He had a meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister. He was speaking to President Xi Jinping and of course President Putin in the SCO summit. He had met a lot of other leaders there. And that really got US worried. Because here India was doing something different, because other nations, for example the smaller nations, even Mexico, actually were dancing to the US tunes, and President Trump was so arrogant to say that Mexico will do what I tell them to do. In fact, this particular tariff which we saw on Indian goods was meant to hurt, there's no doubt about it, and it would have hurt in a long term also. But then Indians are very innovative. We have our jugaad. We will find a way out to deal with this crisis. Part of the tension stems from US objections to India's purchase of Russian oil and military equipment. Well, the oil equipment and military equipment, and of course what we buy from Russia otherwise, mainly the oil and the military equipment. Let us look at it in separate buckets. Why did we buy oil from Russia? When the Ukraine-Russia war started, we all know that the oil went through the roof because the Western countries put sanctions on Russia. Suddenly, it was rocketing up by 3 figures, more than $120 a dollar, and it had even gone to 200 when President Biden asked Prime Minister Modi to get his public sector companies and also the private sector companies in India who have refineries to buy Russian oil, refine it and sell to different countries, including the USA. And now we are learning that we are also selling diesel to Ukraine. So basically, Ukraine was paying us to pay Russia so that Russia could bomb Ukraine. That's what President Trump's logic would be. But The Tianjin meetings changed all that, because suddenly we saw India, Russia and China sitting on the same table. Of course, there were many other nations, as I indicated before, under the SCO Shanghai, which is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And Modi and Xi made statements about being partners and not rivals, and emphasized that improving the ties and cooperating on trade, regional stability matters. And those famous words, the elephant and the dragon will dance, and they will dance. India's strategy of strategic autonomy is not simply choosing sides. In fact, India is trying to balance relationship, asserting its own space. Remember, a tough nation will always be respected. And President Trump has realized it, that India will not bend no matter what pressure he put on them. In fact, the rhetoric that we saw from Delhi, we actually didn't say anything of that sort. There was no shrill statements, there was no chest beating, nothing. Cool. It was Dr. Jaishankar who was dealing with all the comments and some other ministers, but Prime Minister Modi didn't speak a word about the tariffs. Of course he did, when he was addressing certain public meetings where we said we need to now look inward, we need to do local marketing, we need to sell those products in India, we have to find new markets for which the government would help. In fact, the Chinese-Indian ties can also be looked at from the marketing perspective, from the sales perspective, through a third-party lens. I mean, it is not just an anti-US move that India went to China. There was a meeting and obviously Prime Minister Modi would go for it. The obvious question is, has the US pressure forced India to move to China? And I said yes, that is, the force might be a strong word. But yes, the US policies, tariffs, trade and pressures are clearly influencing India's diplomatic calculations. Some of the pressures that India faces, for example, is the economic fallout. Industries such as dairy and agriculture. If we sign up an agreement with the US tomorrow, will the genetically modified crops come into India? That's a big question, and it's a sure no-no for the government. We need to protect our agriculture, our dairy industry, our farmers, because they are sensitive to major trade disruptions. We cannot allow that to happen. Dairy is a different ballgame altogether. We will never accept American milk products because the American cows are fed non-veg, in a broad sense of the word. Their feed is not what we have in India. So obviously the Indians wouldn't pick up that kind of milk from there. Now, India's goal of protecting its domestic producers, as I said before, and its long-term supply chains matter a lot. In fact, India needs to maintain excellent relations with neighbors like China and Russia for regional stability. And of course, we have our own issues, the border issues, the trade, etc. So what we need to be doing and what we need to be seeing is not reacting to the US pressure. We are rebalancing our foreign policy. We are re-engaging with China and Russia, and more visibly than in recent years, but yet without giving up the strategic independence. That is why suddenly you see President Trump is saying he is ready to sign a deal with India. Did we say so? No, but Prime Minister Modi responded in a very diplomatic manner, saying we are glad, we are speaking to each other, and it will be good to have good relations with the United States of America. But on our terms, not on President Trump's terms. That is very, very clear. President Trump can arm twist the EU, he can arm twist Mexico, he can arm twist Canada, he can arm twist Vietnam, but he cannot arm twist Bharat, and that's very, very clear. So the very optics of the entire meeting that happened at SCO seems to have sent a message to President Trump that Delhi is willing to engage with Beijing, which is America's biggest bugbear, on more terms. India used the SCO as a platform to push back against what China calls the bullying behavior in international trade in terms of tariffs from the US. In fact, India also proposed that there should be regional cooperation, connectivity, trade via the SCO mechanisms and innovation. President Trump lamented at one point in time, you might all remember that famous statement saying India and Russia have gone into the dark ages into China. Well, that was whose making? It was President Trump's making. He was the one who did it. But wasn't that Trump's follies? Yes, the tariffs and the threat, the language used by some of Trump's team members were atrocious. And that is what is the main problem. Today, those words cannot be taken back. They have done a huge damage to the US-India relations. They should have been control on their tongue. They didn't. The US everybody in the US team in President Trump were going ballistic at India for buying Russian oil without knowing who started it in the first place. I mean, there is China which buys more oil, we all know, from Russia than us. There's Turkey that buys oil. There's Europe which is buying oil and gas. Everybody is doing it, but why are we only being targeted? It's obvious that President Trump didn't like the fact that Prime Minister Modi was not groveling before him. He was not prostrating before him. He wanted that to happen, like Asim Munir went and literally fell at the feet of President Trump. He wanted that to happen. He wanted Modi to come to US and say, I recommend Trump for a Nobel Prize. Well, Prime Minister Modi is not going to do it. That's for sure. But ladies and gentlemen, more than anything else, what is happening now is a good example of how diplomacy is handled in the modern times. True, we have our problems with China. We have border dispute. We have historical tensions. 62 wars, 65 war. We had a lot of wars with China. The Galwan clash, the Doklam clash. All that happened. But then trade is separate. International diplomacy is separate. We need to kind of separate these two things. One is look at the short term. One is look at the long term. China is a major manufacturing power. Let's not, shy away from saying that. Even Europe is facing the brunt. US is facing the brunt. We lost 40, 50 years in socialism till 91 when the Indian economy was opened up. We have a lot of catching up to do with China. But if you are friendly with them, we can bring a lot of technology into India. We can bring a lot of manufacturing into India. And that will actually perk up the Indian industry. And of course, China has its own kind of problems with it. Its banking sector is in trouble. Its real estate went bust long time back. But as I said, its manufacturing is still very strong. They're very cost effective. They're very efficient. And that's the one thing with the Indian industry has to learn. That you don't do things in a small way. China, when it does things in a big way. Of course, there is a big role for the government in this because China gives a lot of subsidy to its industries directly and indirectly. India also does it, but we need to do it in a bigger way now. We need to ensure that across many sectors, defense, technology, trade, we do all this with the US also, isn't it? We buy a lot of equipment from US, we buy defense equipment mainly from the US. So what stops the relationship from going forward? Of course, India has its domestic economic concerns. The tariffs, as I said, will hit the exporters, industries, farmers, everyone. But we can't afford to alienate too many partners. In fact, the language used is partners and not rivals, not third-party lenses. This is the most important thing. That's what the language that came in from China was when the meeting happened at the SCO, that we are all in it together because there is a bigger enemy sitting out there. So in conclusion, what I want to say is that yes, the US tariff war has pushed India to reset its relationship with China. The good and bad part about it, the SCO summit has been a stage for that. But this is less India forced to side with China. That is not the right thing. It is India adjusting to a difficult balancing act and increasingly unwilling to take on all the US pressure lying down. I will analyze more of this as we come along in the days to come, but I'm sure you got a hang of it. We are a nation that has a long-standing relationship with Russia. We are now trying to mend our fences with China. And of course, there's a lot of things happening all around the world. Let's see how things goes from here. Thank you for watching. Jai Hind.